What's going on? What's going on? It's your boy DameSmiff, and so we are here at another episode of a late night at Dames. And I hope you're enjoying this series because I'm getting into the groove of things as far as being a actual like live content creator. I'm used to doing long form and short form content with kind of like a I guess you could say a stop motion approach where like you record, stop, maybe batch some content, stop, and then edit and things like that. But for me, live is a lot cooler because I generally work better with this process in my music. So like when I'm creating and things like that, I prefer to just pick up and drop things. I'd rather not, harken on like a big project every single time I want to make some music, right? So live streaming is a good process for me as far as keeping things up and going. But I want to know how you guys are doing as well. As far as my musicians out there in America, in the world, out there in the view over here, right? How are things going for you in the year 2025? It's almost over. Because if you think about it, if you're really in the business, you're probably thinking about next year already. And if you're thinking about next year, you probably know that we have just another quarter left of this year and things will be rolling yet another round, right? And so considering that, how are things going for you as far as finances, as far as making sure everything is in order for your business? Meaning, like, is your catalog in order? Are you making sure, you have your appointments in order? And what are you prioritizing? Because a lot of times we have different things tugging at our attention, right? And it could be a number of things from like family to work to, like I was just explaining, money. And so a lot of times when these things come up, we try to find ways to deal with it and ways to kind of like, I'm looking for the right word, but in a sense, to cope or to numb the stresses of our day-to-day lives. And especially as musicians, we don't really have the, let's say, the stability of the skill of sales or the stability of having like a trade or a service industry, right? When it comes particularly to music, there is a certain demand that we need to feed that may go outside of our personal agenda. So, if you're, I speak about this all the time. If you're a, violinist who went to school for music, there's a very narrow path for you as far as your creativity. Okay. Now, the opportunities for you, they're very fruitful, but they're not creative. Like you're not going to be, transforming the violin as it is today in the music industry, or if you are, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of influence. But the reason I'm saying that is because many of us, when we're getting into the music industry or getting into our musical career, we get into it for various reasons. And we usually don't have one that is selfless, meaning you're doing this for others. And I'm only saying that because music is transformed now into kind of like a DoorDash gig economy style kind of industry. Whereas, for example, I'll use myself. I try to work and build towards a more of a musical empire type of mindset, meaning I would prefer to be a one-stop shop for products and services that maybe musicians and businesses that need music would, require. So that could be things from, let's say if you're a business, that could be music for your commercials, maybe music for your general, ambiance of your building. Maybe you need music to set the mood for your store. You can do marketing campaigns that may need sound effects, Foley artists, and things like that. Maybe you need voice actors and things like that for your commercials, and maybe reading disclaimers or announcements and things like that in your building. I can think of things, that a musician can bring value to a business, right? On the other hand, for specifically musicians, I would like to be able to, either manage artists or consult with artists to be able to help them understand their career paths and their choices and things like that. And of course, navigating the law, navigating media and technology and stuff like that. But in order to be able to do that, I have to function from a certain mindset, meaning I have to function in a way that's going to cultivate or nurture the ability to provide all of that. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who get into the music industry simply because of the opportunity that the skill of their musicianship brings. So you may have a guy who's like in his 30s and he can play the guitar really well, or maybe knows some songs, but he has no plans of managing artists or teaching or running a label or even putting an album out, right? So the position he plays in the music industry is more of a like one-to-one kind of relationship. Like I do the show or I perform the song, I get paid for that, right? There's no really thought of back end, there's no building that's necessarily needed other than, your skill and education. So when it comes to choosing which position you want to be in as a musician, it comes with its stresses, and those stresses are different. Now, I'm only pointing that out because what we're going to talk about today is a bit more on the side of trying to understand these stresses than trying to shame them or trying to change them, because we can't really change things that we're not in control of other than the things that we are actually in control of. So I wanted to kind of just lay the foundation a bit of the perspective musicians and artists kind of move through. And that being that if you're trying to be a musician that helps other musicians and helps other businesses, That's one side of the coin. And on the other side of the coin is that you could be doing this for your own personal gain, and that has its other side of the coin, stresses. So when I think of these things for myself, like with my example of trying to build an empire, and not really an empire, I think that's the wrong word. It's just genuinely a business, but both options are businesses. But there's another word that's a little more apt to what I'm trying to say. But the thing is with my perspective of my career path, right? As I'm getting further along into it and I'm having more conversations with my peers, I'm starting to see the difference in the conversations in how people are viewing their own careers. So, for example, I could be sitting next to let's say like a trombone player or something like that, right? And this trombone player is in the same band or in the same, orchestra or in the same community or, scene where for them, they're just doing it because maybe their family just is full of musicians and they just all kind of play. And he plans on doing this as a hobby and breaking off and doing something else as a career, like an actual like occupation, right? Whereas for me, who could be sitting right next to them, we're utilizing the same skill for a totally different agenda. So this creates a kind of dissonance in what we both demand from the industry, right? So this is kind of what I mean when I say I have conversations with musicians and artists and I start to see the difference in the mindset. So on one hand, the trombone player may feel like because they are a skilled musician or maybe they have performed for many years or are a veteran, there is some kind of benefit to this or some kind of incentive to continue doing this, right? And for them, it could be anything. Like it could be whatever they think it is. So let's say for this example, they believe that because they've played as long as they have in the orchestra that they've played in, they deserve a certain salary. On the other side of the coin, I, as another musician, would be sitting in the same band or the same orchestra, playing, let's say, the same instrument. And on my side, I would think I'm not necessarily owed anything at all. I would be thinking I would have to earn whatever salary I'm choosing to get, meaning like it could come from sales, it could come from different gigs, maybe contracts or sponsorships and things like that. But the idea that because I have done something outside of, myself, that I would be getting some kind of incentive or benefit is just foreign to this particular musician. Now, the reason we have to lay this part of the perspective out is because now we have two different musicians functioning in the same industry with two different mindsets, but they both have the same options to cope with these stresses. And now, when we think about coping with these stresses, what do you think that would look like for a musician? So, let me give you an example from another completely different industry. If you were an athlete or in the fitness industry or anything like that, and you did a really, really intense workout, and that was kind of like your job, like you were an athlete that needed to perform, right? There are stresses that come with that job and, being in that environment. What are the things you think that this athlete would turn to in order to deal with or cope with those stresses? And if you put it in the comments, I'll gladly have that conversation with you. But in normal American TV fashion, we got the answer. And for athletes, a lot of the stressors that they'll deal with are just like most people, they'll be mental or physical, but the resources are very beneficial. So they'll be something like having a physical therapist, which can help them with massages, stretching, dynamic stretches. You can have an actual coach or trainer who's specifically there to help them with mobility, movement, and sometimes even recovery as far as, joints and things like that. You can have nutritionists or dietitians to help you with eating better and making sure your, insides are functioning well. You can have coaches for sleep. You can have coaches for your mood. You can have coaches for pretty much most physical things when it comes to specifically the athlete, right? And that's just off the top of our head. So now if you bring that from the athlete to the average person who's working at, like, your manager at Food Lion or something like that, you have pretty much the option to do the same thing if you can afford it. The key thing is most people don't turn to these options because they're not readily available as far as what our mind goes to, as far as our mindset for our career. And what do I mean by that when I say that? Great question, little chat dude. Well, the reason I'm saying that is because the athlete, when you think of an actual athlete, a baseball player, a soccer player, they're going into their career knowing that the stresses they have are obvious and they have the obvious resources to deal with their stressors. It's kind of rare for like somebody to, be a baseball player and think, all right, my back is sore from baseball practice. Let me go play Xbox. Like a lot of them don't really think like that, right? Most of them pretty much will go ask a coach or go to their physical trainer and then get an actual solution, or go to cryotherapy or something like that, right? Go to a doctor, physician. So if an athlete goes into their job knowing this, being that these are their options, at least on a professional level, right? I'm sure you're probably not thinking this in high school, but if you're in, college and you're actually trying to make a career out of your athleticism, this is usually the mindset you will go into your career with, right? But when we are considering musicians, what are the options that they will think of when dealing with the stresses of being a musician? And that's why in the beginning, I laid out what it's like to actually think from the perspective of a musician. Either you're, playing your instrument, you're busking in the street, or you play at your church, or you play in your group, and you just want to make it to the next month, right? Or you're doing all kinds of jobs in order to ultimately build upon some kind of network you're building. It could be, like I said, an empire earlier. Maybe you're making a record label. Maybe you're managing a band, but you're not an actual instrumentalist or vocalist, but you're in the industry. What are the options you have to turn to when dealing with the stresses of these jobs? Now, as I said, with the regular guy versus the athlete, you have pretty much the same options if you can afford them. But usually, the mindset is the difference between what you're going to choose to deal with these stresses. So, let's say we're thinking about, I don't know, you're talking to like a singer, right? You're a singer and you're in New York State, New York City, wherever, right? And you just got out of college and you're gigging, you're finally doing some shows. When we think about the stresses that come with being a singer in New York City, let's say as a, young female singer in New York, all the stresses that come with that, the obvious resources, at least in my mind, you would have to deal with would be like, hopefully you would have a mentor that would kind of help you with the social side of dealing with being in New York, like a local mentor who can like get you hip to the scene. But on the other side, you will need a vocal coach. You're going to need a gym coach or some kind of plan that you can, you know, follow with competence and confidence. And then on the other hand, you also have options like over the counter drugs. You can go party. Me not really doing drugs at parties, but like you can just, do silly things with your friends, like just spend the night dancing. You can do dumb stuff like that. You can spend all your money eating instead of spending it on lessons and coaching and things like that. So these resources to cope with the stresses of the job, which is the key thing to focus on here, is that These are things that are here for you to cope with the stresses, are not necessarily all beneficial because you enjoy them. And so some of the things I named for this singer, like, obviously it sounds fun when you say it out loud. Hanging out with your friends at a party in New York sounds great. But if you have a specific goal to do, will it help you? And, we can think of examples, but just to throw one out there, if you have a show on Monday and you get blackout drunk Friday and Saturday, do you think that's going to help you? You know, if you know you have, I don't know, a tour coming up in the next 9 months, does it make more sense to buy a car or pay for lessons to, get a new apartment or maybe get a vocal coach? What are the better, resources for you to use to deal with the stresses of your actual job, right? So this is why I had to kind of like lay out the first 15-20 minutes of this, because most people are going to go into what we're about to talk about with their own agenda, and they'll just kind of like think from a third person perspective on how most people will function. But in reality, you kind of have to put it in a first person perspective to really understand how it affects yourself, of course, but how it's going to affect particularly musicians and artists, because the occupation of being an artist, excuse me, truly transcends most people. Like, you can be a 50-year-old man working at McDonald's as a, overnight guy, but you can play a mean percussion line. Like, things like that exist, and the stresses with dealing with life should ideally be available for you as a musician. But if you can't afford them, or if you have a completely different mindset, the options won't look like options. You honestly won't even know you have them. So this is where we're going to get into the whole general idea of today's topic, which is you are not a rapper, you're an addict with a soundtrack. So if you're interested in conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button, because when you hit the like button, it actually shows other people that this video is dope. You agree with the sentiment, or maybe you enjoyed, what happened, you were entertained. And I try to make these particular live streams kind of more of a conversation for, later comments and things like that. But that's important for you guys to kind of like take away after. And so the other thing is, make sure you subscribe, because when you're subscribed, you'll catch all my new videos. And this channel is kind of growing in the sense of we have different kinds of content here, right? Probably like I'll say like three pillars of kinds of content. I usually talk about like a personal life vlog, stuff like that, from the perspective of a musician. Other things, like, you'll see me exploring musicianship like intentionally, and then we'll do stuff like this where I'll just have conversations. And then the last thing is, of course, fitness and food and things like that. Fitness and food is always going to help musicians and people alike. But if you're interested in this, make sure you hit subscribe. And I'll also kind of explore different ways to learn and like teach you guys, and explore different ways to expose yourself to different things and perspectives in the world. And this is going to be important, because if you want to be a musician, most of the time musicians struggle with attaching themselves to the greater society. Like, we'll be so either tied up in our own music, or maybe we think we're so cool and so unique and special, we rap the hardest or whatever, that nobody can get us, and then nobody can relate, and then it doesn't make sense. So I wanted to bring up our pal Gemini here, and we're back. And so I asked it a quick question, and I basically asked it, what are the key stats for addiction in the United States? And what are the ages of the different demographics? And are there signs that people can notice before an addiction? Now, the reason we asked this question is because the idea that people are going to be great musicians, and then you're going to, play all the right notes, and then you're going to sign all the deals and meet all the greatest people and shake their hands, and then at the end of it, we're going to love all your music and it's going to be right, and you're going to do that sober, is crazy. is because that means you just don't understand what's going on. On the other hand, if you think you're going to do all that with little to minimal or manageable stress, you're also crazy. That means you also don't know what's going on. If you've ever watched anything James Brown has done, you can tell that this job is stressful. So now, if we want to think about things like how to deal with it, we got to consider just the facts of just how most people deal with stresses and the options they have. And I'm using stresses as one thing. So like obviously people will be um addicted to different things or pushed to addiction for different reasons, but for me this is more so focusing on people that are looking for an escape and try to use music as a way to tap into that. And I've seen some people try to use music as a way to sell addictive substances, to expose addictive substances, to kind of like shine a light on things. But for the most part, it's come with their own personal agenda and not necessarily an expression of trying to be helpful to other people or informative. So I'm going to inform you because I don't do drugs and I don't be doing drugs in my music. So I'm just going to inform you. And if you're an artist and you do these things, and if you feel as if you are addicted to something, we should learn a few things. So our little AI buddy here says, in the United States, addiction, also known as substance use disorder, is a significant public health issue. According to data from the 2023 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, the NSDUH, here are some key statistics. But before we get into the statistics, one thing that stood out to me that was weird, not really weird, but it stood out. I'll just say that they changed the word addiction, or at least they said addiction, also known as a substance use disorder. I had to look up what is a define disorder. And Gemini says the word disorder can have different meanings depending on the context. But in a medical or scientific sense, it generally refers to an abnormal physical or medical condition. So if we stop right there, my brain makes me think, okay, abnormal physical or mental condition. So if we scroll back up and we use substance use disorder, using substances is pretty normal. We use all kind of substances that are legal. Substances aren't bad. It's just a word to identify the thing that we are using, right? So substance use disorder, so they're abnormally using substances. This is what kind of confused me. So that does that mean that like if you use just enough weed, is it not a disorder? Is it like okay? Or if you use a little bit of weed, is it a disorder because that specific substance affects you? You know what I'm saying? I don't know how it works. And same with the mental condition, right? But it continues to say in defining disorder that in the context of health, a disorder is a disturbance in the regular or normal functions of an individual's body or mind. If we stop right there, this is why I said what I said. If you smoke a little weed, is that a disturbance in the regular normal functions of your body or mind? Like if you get high a little and like you get whoa, like a little crazy, right? And so this is what I mean by like the word substance is not as bad as saying illegal substance, because you could take Tylenol, you could take Robitussin, you could take all kinds of things and they affect your body. It's a disturbance in the regular normal functions, but we can't get into what a regular normal function of the body means. That would just muddy up the conversation. So in context of this, we'll say this: your regular or normal function are you to be able to perform your instrument. There we go. So if you can get on stage, say, the fuck is going on, Boston? Let's party. And if you can do that without falling over, without ruining the show, without missing notes, and you know where you are and you got paid, then I would say you functioned normally, right? But the issue with changing it from addiction to substance use disorder is because if you were to get on stage as a guitar player buzzed off a beer, that's a disturbance in your regular normal functions in the body or mind. I wouldn't be on stage buzzed at the Super Bowl, you know what I'm saying? So that's just, I don't know, maybe that's a language thing. You guys let me know in the chat. Maybe I'm overthinking this and being a nerd, but that was weird to see. But it continues to say that it's often used to describe a condition that affects a person's health and functioning, but it may not be as clearly defined or have a cause as a disease. For example, medical disorders can be conditions like a digestive disorder or a blood disorder, which disrupts the normal functioning of a specific body or specific system in the body. So, a disruption in the digestive system is a disorder. Same with the blood. Mental disorders like substance use disorder. There's a distinction here. Also known as addiction, are characterized by significant disturbances in thinking, emotional regulation, or behavior that cause distress or impair a person's ability to function in daily life. So already they make me, this could be just AI organizing this, so I'm not taking it too serious, but they're already kind of connecting substance use disorder with mental over what I would assume to be, well, at least in this definition, they don't really talk about any physical changes. So I don't know. That's kind of weird. Between calling this a disorder and a addiction are kind of like pretty far apart, in my opinion. My brain is telling me that, like, if you're addicted to something, you kind of can't help yourself. But a disorder could be like you drinking too much or eating too much sugar in a day, and now you're like passing out. Like, I don't understand how that could work. But in a non-medical context, disorder simply means a state of untidiness, confusion, or lack of order. For instance, the room was in a state of complete disorder. Just papers everywhere, books everywhere. So basically, the word disorder means that something is not functioning in order. The problem we have here with what we're about to read is that we don't know where the line is drawn to say that you're drinking beer casually to you have a substance use disorder. We don't know where the line is drawn. So if we continue on and see what Gemini is saying here about addiction, I just want to kind of lay out our perspective when we go into the conversation, because a lot of musicians, they know what they're doing is addictive. They understand the culture of being a musician or functioning in live, performances and things like that. But the actual health side of it doesn't really come up until you have somebody explain it to you that is not usually a musician, right? So you'll see things like I was saying, a singer in New York. You'll see singers in New York doing coke. You'll see, if you want to go from something as extreme as coke to they'll drink wine, alcohol, you know what I'm saying? Pills is another big thing. Bands of all over the world smoking weed, doing pills. Pretty much everybody's drinking alcohol. And I'm just talking about the United States. So it can be different around the world. Y'all all do different things. But the key thing is that most people that call themselves musicians are taking something that is going to, in my opinion, create a substance use disorder within your body or your physicality at some point. And I think the key thing to just remember here is that two things. It's easy to do and accessible, meaning like you pretty much will get paid to do it if you're a good enough musician. Like people will pay you to do these things to yourself. And then the next thing is that it's something that clearly is not defined and also is not clear on the options there are to cope with these things or to avoid these things as options for coping with the stresses of the job. So the key statistics that we need to think about here are the overall prevalence. Approximately 48.5 million Americans aged 12 and older, which is 16.7% of this population, battled a substance use disorder in the past year. So about 16% of American citizens, which is about 50 million people, and that's including children, had a substance use disorder. So again, that could mean, because it's not using the word addiction, my brain is not going to an addict. My brain is going to a problem caused by a substance. You know, if that makes sense. So here's how my brain looks at it. An addict is a person that is, in a way, trapped, almost parasitically stuck to either a substance or the environment a substance brings. So like you can be addicted to opioids or weed, and like because of that addiction, all your friends smoke weed. Y'all all smoke weed when y'all hang out. Y'all wear clothes that got weed things on it and stuff like that. So like when you start to think of that, you're an addict, because if you were to part from this, you would go through withdrawals, right? When my brain thinks disorder, it makes me think you smoked weed. Like you just did the thing once. You know, it doesn't make me think that you're stuck on it. It's just when you smoke weed, it's gonna create literally a disorder. Like it's gonna do something to your brain that's not normal. Like unless you are doing it for a specific, like you're trying to get it to do what it's specifically asked to do. I don't understand that. That's just the one thing that's messing me up here. But I'm not the one with the degrees. So then it goes on to talk about alcohol. Alcohol's about 10.2% of Americans aged 12 and older, which is 28.9 million people had an alcohol use disorder. Again, could just mean you used alcohol and had a bad time. Doesn't, to me, signify that you're an addict, but you know, is what it is. Drugs. Around 27.2 million people aged 12 or older, which is 9.7% of the population, had a drug use disorder. So 48.5 million total, split up into 28.9 plus another 27.2. Yeah, that's crazy. That's a lot of people. So yeah, total of 16% of Americans are battling or have battled with a substance use disorder in the past year. That's 1 year, one singular batch of 52 weeks. So it continues to say that in 2023, an estimated 54.2 million people needed treatment for an SUD, substance use disorder, but only a small fraction received it. And it has a link here to Mastermind Services. I wonder if it'll open the link for me. But while that does that, we'll continue to look and say. So I do want to know what the fraction is. It won't load for me. Okay, don't worry about it. But it's crazy that if only a fraction of 54.2 million people we know needed it, but only a fraction received it, we got to ask why. because going back to the mindset that you will go into your music career, were a lot of these people pursuing treatment, or were these people that we noticed needed treatment and they never received it because they needed like an extra step of, intention? Usually something like treatment, you got to sign for something, or, say you need it out loud, but we don't know what that means. Co-occurring disorders. And this is the next thing that I was thinking of when they separated alcohol and drugs. What are the, I guess you can say, representations of people that are doing? So we're trying to figure out what happens when people have two substance use disorders at the same time. Like, is it pretty much the same effects, or is it worse off and things like that? But it says that many people with substance use disorders also struggle with mental health issues. So, oh, okay. So they don't mean two different substance disorders. They mean mental health and things like that. Okay. Approximately 7.5 million people battled both alcohol and drug use disorders simultaneously, and 20.4 million adults experienced co occurring mental health and substance use disorders. So, from what I'm reading here, both alcohol and drug use disorders simultaneously were in 7.5 million people, and 20.4 million adults experienced a co occurring mental health disorder as well as a substance use disorder. So it's like a triple banger, basically. I'm assuming that that's how I read that, right? So now we can get into the ages. Now the ages is important because we don't want children to be on drugs, but to keep it specifically on musicians and things like that, the key thing to remember is that the access is easy and the options aren't obvious for avoiding these coping mechanisms, or dealing with the stresses of the job. So with that being said, we're going to go through the age demographics, and we're going to figure out, like, or at least ponder upon what would make it easy for these ages to be able to get these substances and to wind up having these situations. And then also, why is it not obvious for them to be able to avoid these things, to wind up having 48.5 million Americans, and we're just talking about the musicians in this video, but we got to consider the information we have in front of us. So, ages and demographics. Addiction affects people of all ages, genders, and backgrounds, but certain demographics are at higher risk. So that just can mean a number of things, but I would think that what they're suggesting here is that if you have, when we think of the word demographics, it's deeper than skin color, height, it's deeper than location. Sometimes it's deeper than income. It can be something as simple as like mindset. Like if you're around selfish people, that's a demographic of people, right? And so that's how complex that could get. But I think what they're generally saying is, like, let's say if you're in an area where most people don't have access to, let's say, resources that would avoid the stresses that cause mental health disorders. So things like good food, gyms, playgrounds, maybe their streets are dirty. There's not a lot of like good paying jobs and things like that. The air sucks. People are lazy. They don't really clean up after themselves. The city sucks. Their mayor sucks. Like, right? That's going to cause more people to be prone to mental health disorders because of the environment, right? So this demographic, when we start to identify these people, are the people that we're going to say are at higher risk. So that could be a color, that could be a certain income, that could be those things. But that is just to say that this is how we identify people who are at higher risk. So let's get into the ages. So from 12 to 17, in 2023, about 8.5% of the 12 to 17-year-olds had a substance use disorder in the past year. So that's 2.2 million teenagers. That's a lot of teenagers. Now, when we talk about the ease of access, how are teenagers even getting the things that can cause them to have substance use disorders? The obvious one is adults. Adults just giving it to them, being neglectful, all kinds of things, right? But that doesn't really absolve the responsibility of people making it kind of like a acceptable thing, right? The reason why I started the video out kind of like showing the perspective of a musician is that usually when you think of a musician, if you're not thinking of like, honestly, honestly, when you think of most musicians, there is a level of substance abuse that most people expect from musicians and artists. But you don't really expect it to come from a 12 to 17-year-old. Lest you were an adult that is neglectful or part of the group that, helped this happen, I guess you could say. Or, you're part of the group of people that it kind of like what goes around comes around kind of mindset. And that speaks again to the demographic that are at a higher risk. Adolescents are at a higher risk simply because they are at the whim of adults. If the adults are the ones that are addicted and they have them in their care, they're at higher risk. If the adults are around the environment and they are under the care of those adults, they're at higher risk. So this is why I said it goes deeper than just race and money and things like that. This demographic of people is at higher risk of substance disorders, addictions, simply because of these things, right? So let's go to the next age group. Young adults, 18 to 25. So these are our, we would call these early adults, young adults, men and women that are getting their lives started and things like that. They should be old enough to know like right and wrong, how to make a living, and get literally their lives started, right? And it says that this age group has the highest rates of addiction, the highest rates of addiction. And I can kind of guess why. And it says in 2023, approximately 27.1% of young adults, which is almost 30%, which is almost half, which is almost 100, or 92 million people struggle with a substance use disorder. So I like how when they did, or at least Gemini did this, I don't know if it was coded to do this or not, but when it's talking about the teenagers, they did call them teenagers, but when it talked about the young adults, they're called people now. Again, going back to me harking on the word disorder, going from disorder to addiction, the language plays a role because as an artist, as a rapper, as a lyricist, the language plays a role in how it hits me, right? And so when I hear 9.2 million people, it makes me think these people are already acclimated in the society. We expect certain consequences from these people's decisions and outcomes and environments. 9.2 million of these people are about to become what I had just described as young adults, people getting their lives started. They're going to begin their lives with a struggle with a substance use disorder. 9.2 million people. So that's why it hits different when you say it that way versus 2.2 million teens and we just start talking about their parents, right? Now you realize that there's people who are out of the covering of their parents now. You, as a sober person watching this, is going to look at these 9.2 million people as responsible for the outcomes, right? So then let's go back to the two things I was saying. What made it easy for them to get the things that made this substance abuse disorder? And how or what do they think is the obvious solutions for preventing a addiction or coping with the things that come with, again, keeping it on music, being a young 18 to 25-year-old musician in the world? In my opinion, if these 9.2 million people include the previous 2.2 million people, I would assume that a lot of the people in this age group probably just got better at getting the things that they were using. But then also, being a young adult, you now have access. So there are certain things you get access to at 18, at 21, that we no longer will turn you away from because you are now a adult. You can do whatever you want. You're no longer under the covering of your parents, and the only thing you really have to worry about is the law and your spouse. And so if you and your family and things like that. So other than that, we give our young adults access to the substances that cause disorders in 2.2 million teens and about 16% of our adults. We just let them get the option to use it, right? Now, previously when I was talking at the very beginning of this, these young adults still have the option to just go to a coach, go get therapy, to eat better food, to go to a dietitian, and go to a doctor. But why don't they choose it? Why is it not obvious to them, right? So let's get to the next age group. Adults, full-on adults. And they say adults are 26 years old and up. It says about 37 million adults, 37 million, which is 16.6%, struggled with a substance use disorder just in the past year. Now, that's pretty crazy, but again, it just kind of just exacerbates the previous point of these people being full-aged adults. 37 million of them struggled. It doesn't mean that they didn't get better, but they did have to struggle with substances. And what was it that made it obvious for them to wind up having to go through this consequence? Meaning, like, what led them down that path quicker than the others? And then we got to figure out is what made it easy for them to get access, because once you turn 18, it's not like there's a corner store or alcohol on every corner store, right? No, it wouldn't be that easy. So as we can get into it, we can get into the warning signs of addiction. And the key thing to remember is that I wanted to point this out because a lot of people are musicians and artists and things like that. And I keep hearing, especially over the past, I say like 10 years, a lot of rappers and things like that talking about drug use, but they weren't talking about it in the sense of like experiences. They were talking about it as if it was a commercial, right? Almost an advertisement. But that's similar to like how I would talk about going to the gym or how I would talk about playing an instrument. I'm excited to do it and I want you to try it too, right? But when we talk about drug use and what comes with it, I think there's a certain line that many artists like to stop at that I personally think is a little bit cowardly, because you're missing the opportunity to really be vulnerable. A few artists can pull it off. Like you'll see some artists be able to speak about their drug use and then really explain like what they had to go through. Rick Ross did a good job of this. Jay Worthy does a good job of this. Wiz Khalifa does a good job of this. Juicy J does a good job of this. But Conway, the Machine, does a good job of this. But I think the issue is that if you go into these songs and these artists, products and delivery with a certain mindset, like I was speaking with in the beginning, you're gonna miss it. You're gonna completely miss it. Like if you think it's just like if you take it off of hip hop, if you think it's cool to be in a rock band doing pills or doing coke or doing meth, if you think that's cool, you're probably gonna miss a lot of the sobering things that someone could be showing to you because you're going into it with a certain mindset. So, like, for example, you probably stopped this video a long time ago and didn't make it to this point. If you made it to this point in the video and you still think it's cool to do opioids, and the reasons you come with you're satisfied with as far as the consequences, then yeah, stand on your business. But a lot of the people that we see in the demographics we named are vulnerable. They're 12, 17 years old. So that's an environmental slash, household issue. Young adults, meaning they're just getting their lives started but have all the options in front of them. That means they need guidance. And then we have adults, which by then they probably are well into their bad habits. So people are vulnerable. So the idea that you think something is cool by choice is kind of ridiculous, because we did go over that too. A lot of you listen to music that you were told to like. A lot of you don't understand why you like the certain songs you listen to and things like that. So this is just another peek into that side of it, where some of the people you may be calling cool or dope or got cool rhymes or a cool outfit, or maybe this girl is real cute, she may be dealing with some things that you wouldn't want her to deal with. And it's good to know these things, especially as a fan, because then you can properly support your favorite artists and not just fund their lifestyles to their detriment. So let's get into the warning signs of addiction. My little rant is over. Warning signs of addiction. Identifying an addiction can be challenging, but there are several physical, behavioral, and psychological signs that may indicate a problem. These signs can be present regardless of age, but may manifest differently. Now, again, this is just AI giving you bare bones things with plenty of links in here, right? So make sure you do your own research, talk to your doctor, and make sure you are getting your checkups, Mo, because we need you to be performing tomorrow at the shows and stuff like that, right? So, general signs would be things like changes in behavior, secrecy, lying, or being withdrawn from family and friends. Now, this one is vague, but it is kind of like a tell sign. Like if somebody feels like they got to sneak off the hit of J all the time, you can pretty much guarantee they're addicted. Now, a lot of people don't like to use weed. I might actually try to use weed for the rest of these examples just to kind of prove a point. But a lot of people like to think that you can't be addicted to certain things, or like it doesn't happen to them. The thing is, it doesn't feel like it. Like you would like to believe the crackheads on the street see themselves as we see them. Like you would like to believe that like the guy who sleeps at Planet Fitness and spends his day on the corner or hanging out at 7-Eleven all day, you would like to think he sees himself the same way we see him. But just as I said earlier, Mo, at the top, people go into these lifestyles with a certain mindset, okay? They don't. They see themselves as who they are. For example, when you wake up in the morning, unless you're just a complete like you just don't have happiness in you. When you look in the mirror, don't you think you see a superstar, right? And if you do, then that means you kind of understand what that crackhead is dealing with. Meaning he think he's living his movie and he's the main character. You're the side character. And one day he's just going to turn it around, right? That's the thing that you got to realize when you're a weed head, or you and your friends, you all smoke, but y'all all have like a routine that involves like secrecy, or you not telling people you're smoking, you like spraying all kinds of stuff all over you, or you asking people, hey, do I smell like weed? I smell like tree. I smell like tree. You smell my jacket. When you doing stuff like that, you look like a crackhead, but you don't think you do because you feel like that's normal, right? So whereas you think in your mind, like, I'm just checking to see if I smell like weed, everybody else around you is saying, the weed head's here. Like, that's how they're looking at it. And so that's the key thing. So you want to be able to spot these signs, right? And so, especially with musicians, like if you're dealing with musicians, I'll give you an example of a behavior that I would say is a little more of a positive relationship with the weed, right? If you're dealing with a musician and let's say you're hanging outside the studio and you guys have a recording session coming up and you guys are, standing outside the studio or in the office or whatever, and you guys are talking, and one of your buddies go, "Hey, let's go outside and hit a J." He literally just says that out loud, like, "Hey, let's go outside and hit a J." And you guys say, "Yes, let's go outside and hit a J." You all walk to the parking lot or the designated smoking area. You light up the J, you smoke, and you guys have your great conversation. Maybe you eat your snacks, you do your little sprays and you pat down, and then maybe you go change your jacket so you don't smell like weed or something like that. And you go back in the session, you feel good, you're high, you ate food, and you record your session, you're on time because you're already here at the studio, and you cleaned up after yourself and you left. That doesn't sound like an addict to me. That sounds like somebody who's pretty much a functioning adult, right? With a habit, right? That's a cigarette smoker that knows they got to do some business, right? So I think that's the key thing here. If you can stand on what you're doing, you're being honest, and you're still being able to have a social life, that's the first way to kind of get over this one particular sign in general, right? So this is kind of why we shame addicts in general, because we don't want them to be addicts. Like if you were in an environment where, like a lot of the signs that we're naming earlier, like you're very nervous about people smelling your weed, or you want to smoke and hide and run off and stuff like that. If you're in an environment that's kind of like nurturing that, you might be in a trap house, a bando. You might be in a room full of addicts. But the problem is if you're all wearing suits and you're in a studio or there's pretty girls around, you kind of can't tell. That's why I said you got to pay attention. You got to know these things. This is why I said part of the problem that these people have is that it's easy access. For example, weed is just, everywhere, but you are also in an environment that kind of makes it feel good to do. The signs to get this monkey off your back are not obvious. So the next general sign, neglected responsibilities. And I mentioned that in my studio example, failing to meet obligations at school, work, or home. So if you're a musician and you got a studio session and you need to be recording, but you want to hit a J, which is not wrong. It's technically legal depending on where you are. But if you hit the J, but suddenly you can't pretty much rap, perform as well, or you're late because you needed to pick up roll-ups, or your car broke down because not supposed to be driving it or something like that, or you got pulled over because you're not supposed to be smoking and driving, whatever, it's in the way of your responsibilities. That's when you either need to give it up or figure out a way to get around it. Because again, addiction's not like the easiest thing to deal with, but you do need to get it in order. The next thing, physical health issues, changes in appetite or sleep patterns, sudden weight loss, and a decline in personal hygiene. Or sudden weight loss or gain. But the key thing here is, again, it feels normal for a lot of people when they're doing a lot of these things. So like if you're, again, just to keep it on weed, if you're smoking weed and there's a change in appetite, like you get the munchies, you're not going to notice, right? But if you're a person that's like, all right, I like smoking weed, and now you're smoking weed in the morning, you're smoking weed on the way to work, you're smoking weed when you get off work, you're smoking weed before bed, just those moments alone, and each one of those moments give you the munchies and you actually act on it and eat each time, eventually you're going to gain weight. And unless you're a dude who smokes weed and you just happen to burn calories doing it, it's not going to be good weight, right? So that's one way that people kind of like fall into it starts to like pile up, like you're sneaking away from people in line and smoking weed, but then when you come back you look different because all you've been doing is smoking weed and sitting in the room eating snacks and gaining weight, right? So it's not really gonna work the best, and you ain't making money because who's making money just sitting in the house smoking weed not doing anything, right? So These are the key things. And a decline in personal hygiene, honestly, that's kind of like extreme for weed, unless you are a true weed head if you gave up cleanliness to smoke a J. But that goes hand in hand. Yeah, if you're pretty much neglecting like buying new clothes and like being up and up on your hygiene and combing your hair and stuff like that, then yeah, it's the substance. It's the substance. The next thing, financial problems. An unexplained need for money, borrowing or stealing or not paying bills. Again, this is vague because unexplained need for money is like that could be literally anything could happen. Borrowing or stealing, is not always drugs, but could be drugs. Not paying bills. Nobody wants to pay bills, so you could just decide you're just sad one day and not pay bills. So the reason this is vague is because it has to kind of go alongside these other things, right? So like you're not just gonna just unexplained have a need for money and it's suddenly because you smoked weed, right? That's not how that works. What it is that when you're asking for money and there isn't an explanation and you're still smoking weed, that's how we can tell that you're addicted. So, for example, if you're asking people, "Hey, I need to borrow some money. I got a bill coming up real soon." And as you're doing it, you're blowing weed smoke in their face. They're going to ask you, "Well, why don't you use the weed money?" If there's any kind of resistance in answering that question, you may have the warning signs of an addiction. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because there's a lot of artists and rappers and things like that where we would ask in interviews or people would make comments and things like that. Like, hey, if the money's so tight, why not stop smoking all the weed and invest that money in like a studio or maybe some rap lessons or something like that? I don't know. This is again more resistance. Next thing, it says changes in social circles, dropping old friends for a new group and being secretive about where they go or who they are with, meaning you pretty much became friends with your dealers or your dealers' friends, or the friends that you're now cool with, they got all the cool drugs, so why not hang out with them instead of your boring sober buddies, right? That's a good sign that you're starting to be addicted to a substance and not the thing. And this goes back to the conversation and I was talking about having with other musicians and things like that. Sometimes you'll be having a conversation with rappers at a show or something like that, and you'll kind of realize that they're only really there to get weed money, or they're only really there to get like re-up money, or they're only really here to be high. Like they just want to be high. They're not really here to build a musical empire. This is a gig like a 9 to 5 shift for them. Like this isn't a stepping stone to a milestone or to a goal. And so for them, it feels great to be in the room with them because they're high off drugs. They have the drugs. So for you, if you want to hang out with them, you probably are going to be doing the things that they're doing, likely the drugs. So if you want to live like them, you want to be like them, meaning like you probably enjoy their music, you probably think they have a cool little lifestyle, or maybe it's real chill, maybe this girl is really pretty, you start to do what they like to do and try to appease them and be on their friends list and things like that. So again, starting out at the beginning of this, it's not really going to be something that you're going to be like, "Oh shit, I'm an addict." No, it's not going to be like that. You're going to feel like you can't do what you like to do around people, so you're going to start hiding it. You can't start telling people what you're doing because you think they're going to shame you. So then you start to be withdrawn. Then suddenly you stop hanging out with them people at school. You stop hanging out with people at work, or when you go to work, you just clock in and bounce, and on your break, you gone because you smoking weed. And then when you at home, you're distanced because you hate being at home because you want to smoke weed. And then you're not really around because you always, sleep, or you just sitting around the house rolling up, or packing a bag or something like that. You gain a weight, or you ain't got no muscle because you're not in the gym. You're just a little sack of bones with slime on you, and then you stink. And because of all of that, all your money's going to weed. And because all your money's going to weed, you keep asking us for gas money and for food money. And because you keep asking us for gas money or food money, that means you're not making any, so you can't really pay your bills. And then since you're not paying your bills and you still want to get high, that means you can't afford to get high. So now you got to start hanging out with your friends that actually got the weed, but in order for them to give you the weed, you got to do things for it. And the things you're doing for it, you pretty much don't want people to know you're doing it for. So that's why you're secretive. You see how it kind of like goes into hand in hand, and you're not going to feel like you're doing it. So that's the key thing. And these, I'm using weed as an example. It's just a fake example I have in my head because it's just easy. But you can do the same thing with alcohol. You can do the same thing with pills. You can do the same thing with anything. These are just the warning signs of addiction. That's all it is. It just goes right smack dab down the line. The next thing we have here is specific to different substances. So which substances, and how they act. It says opioids. Signs can include lethargy, slow breathing, nausea, and poor coordination. I haven't really dealt with anybody that was like addicted to opioids or things like that. More so stimulants and alcohol, being in the music scene. But if I was ever talking to somebody that was high off opioids, I probably couldn't tell because I just wouldn't know. I'm vanilla when it comes to that. And it says stimulants. People using stimulants may exhibit increased energy and agitation, rapid speech, and dilated pupils and paranoia. So these are like the things where you're like, basically these substances or these differences and these effects of the substances is just kind of show you like, oh shit, this person's high off coke, or oh shit, this person's like high off weed. This just kind of explain the differences of what you're seeing. And then lastly, alcohol. Alcohol addiction can lead to memory loss, changes in physical appearance like flushed skin, and withdrawal symptoms like headaches, nausea, and anxiety when not drinking. This is the hangover. I would like to call it the hangover. So a quick note about alcohol. Alcohol is actually very, very sugary and a lot of carbs and things like that. It's not water with alcohol. It's a pure substance. It's a pure liquid that you're pouring in your stomach, right? And so your stomach has to process all that. It's got to like break it down, send it through your system, and then through your bloodstream, and then you got to either sweat it out, breathe it out, or blink it out and get it out your body, right? So as your body's doing that, it's got to work to do that. That's pretty much how food just functions through your body. If you eat a cheeseburger, your body's got to break that cheeseburger down into all kinds of compartments, move the shit through your body, and then you'll feel the effects. The problem with alcohol is that the effects feel great in the beginning, but feel like crap getting out. So that's why it says withdrawal symptoms like headaches, nausea, and anxiety when not drinking, because you basically would be just replenishing the thing that makes you feel great from before. So that's why when we talk about stuff like this addiction stuff, and I'm saying that it feels great doing it, it's because when you see commercials for a lot of these substances, the marketing is that you're going to be happy. The marketing is that you're going to do great. The marketing is that you're going to feel good. There's a hard stop in the conversation for most people when it comes to this right here that I'm laying out for you. It's all of this stuff that where you're going to have a disorder. You're going to be one of the millions of people affected by these disorders. You're going to have to deal with what comes with these disorders on your own because you just don't know what's out there. And that's the scary part. Honestly, and I'll say this and we'll close with this. The scary part is being addicted to something as easily as I just explained. You could be addicted, meaning you won't even know that your friends are the ones doing it. You won't know that you're the one high. You won't know that you're the one doing the weird stuff for drugs. You then won't really know, obviously, what to do to fix it, because look at how many people it affected that couldn't get help. It says in 2023, an estimated 54.2 million people needed the treatment. but only a small fraction received it, and we don't know why. So, if this was helpful to you and you think this is going to be a dope conversation for a young musician, old musician, veteran musician, or somebody who you think is struggling with some kind of addiction, and you're trying to get them on the right path as far as just knowing, just understanding, being clear on it, make sure you send them this video and hit the like button, leave a comment. What's your relationship as a musician or outside of music with addiction, and how has this kind of affected your perspective, or at least this video, how has this affected your perspective on what you see from your favorite musicians on TV when you see them doing drugs or holding a beer in their hand? Do you treat it as like, hey, that's a guy who's just enjoying himself, that's just a girl who's enjoying themselves, or do you look at it as like, I'm looking at an addict right now? So let me know. That was a late night at Dames. I will see you guys the next time. I'm out, y'all. Peace.